We are back. It's the Joe Holka Show presented by Line Movement. Joining us once again, the Reception Perception creator, you know him from Yahoo Sports. He's Matt Harmon. I guess one other thing, we had Reeves for a double segment today. I'm very thankful to get Matt Harmon for a double segment. So before we get into Thanksgiving, Matt, how was your week 11, my man?
Week 11 was great, man. I'll always remember it as the Taysom Hill week. I had the intestinal fortitude, let's just put it that way, to throw out Taysom Hill in a lot of daily fantasy lineups because, this is a guy that I've actually met Taysom Hill, spent a little bit of time with him and kind of gotten into that relationship between him and Sean Payton. And, I legit have always believed, whether it's, true or not, I've always believed that Taysom Hill is a guy that Sean Payton really believes in and trusts him as a quarterback. And I feel like a lot of times on the outside we ought to just default to the fact that these guys, especially when this guy is one of the best offensive coaches of the last decade plus, says it they probably know more about the subject than we do. So I went with Taysom Hill in a lot of spots. Felt great. I was happy for him, happy to see him succeed and kind of throw up a middle finger to a bunch of the weirdly negative doubters when it comes to Taysom Hill. So that was pretty much how at least the highlight of my week 11 was.
I didn't know this about you. We got an inside scoop here for anytime Taysom Hill is relevant, man. This is great. I could have used that last week. I played some Taysom Hill, but I was a little bit, I guess, nervous that he wouldn't. I guess I didn't really know if he was going to kind of slow this game down overall with how much he was going to run, but there were moments where it seemed like they just ran him out there like Drew Brees was out there, like a regular quarterback. So that's I guess a very positive thing, right? We know Peyton loves him. He mentioned it, that he's just one of those guys that we probably just trust him when it comes to an offensive weapon, right?
Yeah, I think that situation where the pace could be slowed down and it looks more like the offense that we probably expected with Taysom Hill, that could be what we get this week because Denver's a much better pass defense than they are a rush defense. They play a decent amount of man coverage. We know the relationship between man coverage defenses and scrambling quarterbacks typically favors that rushing quarterback. So we could see that more this week, but I was, again, not totally shocked that they came out and ran a pretty traditional offense because this is not a 1 week thing. I think if they just wanted 1 week, go out and beat the Falcons, they could either run a gimmicky Taysom Hill offense or they could have just thrown out Jameis Winston, who has a pretty strong history of playing the Falcons. But this is going to be, you talk about when Taysom Hill is going to be relevant. You'll be relevant for a little bit because, I don't know when or if Drew Brees is going to be back in the regular season. So they kind of have to see what they have in Hill. And I think they'll probably be a little more multiple this week than they were last week. But yeah, man, we're getting fired up here on the early part of the wide receiver sleeper segment, talking about a guy who's no longer eligible, at least on another season-long fantasy site at any receiver position. So it's going to be a fun situation, I think, to follow here the rest of the year because, like I said, he's not going anywhere. This is going to be New Orleans reality for the time being.
I'm with you. Directly before this, we got news from Adam Schefter that Kenny Golladay, Danny Amendola are out for this game against the Texans. So we're going to circle it back. The people need their Thanksgiving picks, man. We got to give them some Thanksgiving stuff before we get into the main slate. We'll get everyone caught up on that as well. DeAndre Swift is questionable still, so at least we have that type of hope. But we're going to go through just kind of wide receiver as a whole. Now we only have 2 games on the slate. We have Houston at Detroit. We have Washington at Dallas. A couple of the guys that I know you wanted to talk about, Matt, Michael Gallup and Kiki Qt on the cheaper end of things. So let's start there. I think that Gallup is one of those guys that a lot of people are going to be looking to in showdown as well. Kind of that deep threat, this Washington team that has given up some big plays. I guess I've been struggling a little bit with the Dallas wide receiver core overall because it seems so spread out in general, but Michael Gallup is by far the cheapest.
He's by far the cheapest. He's the most volatile, too, so that makes the most sense, right? He's the guy that has still been, for the most part, the vertical threat in this offense. So given the current state of the Cowboys, we know their pass protection is still a problem. Their offensive line, I think, has gotten a little bit better on balance through the course of the season, but it's still, a bottom 10 type of unit. They're not a good pass protection team. That's not good news for a guy like Gallup, who has run the most vertical routes on this team. However, he's still run the most routes on this team. It's not as if through some of the mistakes, through some of the slower production, they've started to dip into his playing time. I would obviously, if you're going to rank these guys, he's the third in this group just in terms of fantasy preference this week and probably for the rest of the season, as he's been pretty much all year. But nevertheless, on a one-day slate, like you're gonna probably break ties in favor of the cheaper player here. Again, not a priority guy at all, but if you're looking for cheap wide receiver plays, Joe, like now that the Steelers are off the board, now that the Ravens are off the board, there's not a lot of appeal here. Like Detroit, I wouldn't touch Detroit's receiver core at all. Marvin Jones, maybe I guess is probably in play, but like they don't have anybody on that cheaper end that you're really messing around with. In Washington, we all know it's pretty much Terry McLaurin and log out. So you're going to have to make some sort of volatile play here if you want to be unique. Even if guys are looking towards Gallup a decent amount, he does make sense in this matchup on this team that I think the passing environment's getting a little bit better with Andy Dalton, post-concussion, post-COVID situation.
Yeah, one thing about this slate, and we were just talking about this with Reeves, is that now, that we don't have this Baltimore and Pittsburgh game, like it's totally viable to leave a bunch of salary on the table as well. So if you're just going to be trying to jam in all these plays, you're going to end up on a very similar roster construction as the field, which is definitely not where you want to be. Michael Gallup right now is only looking at about 13 to 15% ownership on this slate, which is very low for a two-game slate overall. So I like that call. Kiki Qt on this other side of it, I definitely have some interest in him, especially with Stills out in this one. Obviously, we know Randall Cobb still battling through that toe injury, who I believe is going to be out in this game as well. Kiki's basically the same price as Michael Gallup. So what do you think about him in this spot?
It's so funny with Qt because like he fell into, the doghouse, right? Like Bill O'Brien clearly got frustrated with him during the time there, but Bill O'Brien's, obviously long gone. We're not talking about Bill O'Brien anymore. Thank God, by the way. Thank God we're not. But now that we've got Kenny Stills out, we've got Randall Cobb out, Kiki's really the only viable slot option for this team. And that was a role that he actually has played pretty well. Like during his rookie year, they used him as a spot slot receiver, again, before he fell into the doghouse with injuries or whatever it was with O'Brien. He was a slot guy that was sort of playing a similar role, like size-wise, skill set-wise, pure ability-wise. These guys aren't the same player, but like in reception perception, how often he would line up against press coverage and zone coverage. It was actually a role that was pretty similar to Cooper Kupp from 2018 and 2019. So that's going to produce a lot of layup receptions. We saw him last week run a good amount of routes. I would expect that to continue with Randall Cobb, set to miss this game and multiple weeks with the toe injury. We'll see what happens with Kenny Stills, but he makes a perfect cheap play because you're getting access to the most appealing offense on this slate by a country mile here in the Houston Texans. And obviously, Will Fuller, Brandon Cooks, we can project them to dominate the target share, but Qt as a layup slot receiver makes a ton of sense as a cheaper play. Probably, I would say going into this game, just because of the potential game environment between Detroit and Houston, two really bad defenses, one offense that's being captained by a top 3 quarterback in the NFL, in my opinion, in Deshaun Watson, and then a guy in Stafford on the other side that can get it done when the environment is right around him. It's really not right now. That probably has the most juice between these two games. The Texans offense is the best offense. If you're looking to get a cheap piece of it, I think Qt is probably the way you're going there.
Yeah, 4 targets last week, but 3 of those came in the red zone where he did score, so not a lot of yardage there, but he kind of is going to take over a little bit of that Darren Fells role. We see Darren Fells come in and just steal these touchdowns and not really have much of a role outside of that, so I like that quite a bit. Akins last week, 6 targets, career high 83 yards. Maybe they try and get him involved a little bit more, but I'm with you on Qt overall. So this slate, if we take the Detroit mess out of it completely at wide receiver, let's talk about the top for a second. Terry McLaurin, 7K. We got Will Fuller for 6,400 and Amari Cooper for 57. So between those guys, and I guess you can throw CD Lamb into this group as well, Brandon Cooks. So like it's basically those 5 guys or so. Terry McLaurin deserves to be like far and away the most expensive though, right?
Yes. Oh, absolutely. I mean, he's the alpha of that team for sure. He's been one of the 10 best receivers in the NFL. There's really no holes in his game. This was a guy that I was excited about coming into the year. So, and I think he's exceeded those expectations. Like, he's been a guy that was drafted around the wide receiver 24 spot in fantasy and in season-long leagues this year. But again, he's been a clear-cut top 10 real-life receiver this year. He's already over 800 yards. He has a chance to clear 1,000 yards, be the first player in the NFL to do it this year against Dallas if he has another big game. I know he's on the injury report, but yeah, he's the guy that I think should be priced ahead. I think he should be the highest rostered player on the slate. Like, and the Alex Smith relationship probably has been a huge boost for Terry McLaurin. Like, Alex Smith to me looks like what we would have expected Alex Smith to look like at 36 years old, even had he not been coming back from like a catastrophic knee injury. That's a huge win for a player in Alex Smith, and it's a huge win for this entire Washington offense. Like, Smith has been good enough to support McLaurin, to keep drives alive, to get Antonio Gibson some goal line chances. He's been one of the best scoring backs in the NFL so far this year. And every now and again, you'll get Logan Thomas with a 4-catch game. You'll get J.D. McKissick a decent amount of receptions here and there. So, like, that's all we want out of Alex Smith. Like, just be good enough to support Terry McLaurin and to keep the offense moving so that Gibson can get some goal line chances. And he's done that admirably so far.
Let's wrap up this segment by talking about Amari Cooper versus CeeDee Lamb, because I think just looking at this Dallas offense overall with Andy Dalton under center, it's been so spread out. Like, none of these guys have had more than a 20% target share in general. So, like, if you're just looking at that alone, these guys are probably overpriced, but they're also, I mean, going to come in at lower ownership than Will Fuller and Brandon Cooks on this slate. CeeDee Lamb just making these catches in the end zone look just routine that just seem unworldly at times. But Amari Cooper feels like the safer option. CeeDee Lamb still is running those type of routes. If there's going to be pressure coming from Washington, that he could still lock into, I guess, more of a target share here. So I'm struggling with CeeDee Lamb versus Amari Cooper for the Thanksgiving slate right now.
Yeah, I feel, this is weird to say about Cooper because he's not been this guy through the course of his career, but I think he's sort of developed into the floor play of this offense. Like, you can expect him to get the most high value targets and the most targets on the team. I realize, like you said, none of these guys have been a funnel receiver, but Cooper's been pretty consistently clearing 70 yards of late. Like, he's a guy that I think you can look to as a reasonable floor, but I actually think Cooper's a really good vertical player, but I think in the current construction of this offense, with Gallup already running most of the deep routes, and CeeDee Lamb, like, over the last, since week 10, I believe, he has an average depth of target over 10, which is surprising considering the current construction of this offense, and that he still runs a good amount of slot routes. But that's because I think they see him as like a matchup nightmare in that role. And I think they look to him towards scoring area too, because he's very good in tight spaces. He's very good as a contested catch receiver. I think he's the best contested catch receiver on the team right now. And I think, by the end of 2021, probably saying without a doubt that he's the best receiver on the team. That's how good I think he is. Like, in this incredibly talented 2020 rookie wide receiver crop, I think CeeDee Lamb is, even though Justin Jefferson, like we talked about him last week, how much I love that guy. Like, it's going to be a pretty tight battle between those two, I think, by the end of next season as to who's the best in this class. So I think if you're looking for more juice, more of that big upside spot, I think you're looking at CeeDee Lamb. But I think if you're looking for, if your roster construction basically demands that your receiver spot needs, like this one that you're debating between these two guys, you're looking for more of just that pretty safe, like, let me get a single or a double out of this one, I think you can look to Cooper. But if you're looking for more of that home run, I think you look for CeeDee Lamb there.
Love it, man. Going to be an interesting Thanksgiving slate, even though it's only 2 games. I'm still looking forward to it for sure. So if anyone out there is here for the first time, would love it if you consider subscribing to the channel, toss a like on this video. Let me know in the comments your favorite wide receiver below 4K on the Thanksgiving slate.